After months and years of delays, No Time to Die is actually coming out in just a few weeks. That means it's time to continue my series ranking the different movies of the different Bond actors. Today we've made it to the Dalton Lazenby ranking. So let's talk about it. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, joining me today is Griffin Schiller. Griffin, how you doing?
Hello. It has been so long since we've done one of these. Has it been a year? I think it's been longer than a year.
It's been a year and a half.
Okay.
If you guys don't know, we started doing these Bond rankings at the beginning of 2020 as a lead up to No Time to Die. And then, obviously, the movie has been delayed many, many times. We were last fall about to shoot this video, and then the movie got booted once again, delaying us shooting this video again. And finally, time has come for us to talk about the Dalton and Lazenby Bond films.
Yes, so. I'm actually really excited about this one because I think these are three... So, okay, within the Bond community, these three films are often regarded as three of the best in the entire franchise. But for the general audience, Timothy Dalton still gets a bad rap for whatever reason. I don't know why. And often people just forget that about On Her Majesty's Secret Service and George Lazenby because he was the guy who only did one, so it must not have been very good. If you have only seen the Daniel Craig movies, these are three films that I highly recommend going to watch. I know that at least two of these films you're going to be really stoked on, and I've been waiting to hear your thoughts on two of these, specifically one in particular.
So with all of that said, if you're wondering why are we doing the Dalton Lazenby movies together, because as he said, there's only one Lazenby movie, and that wouldn't be a very good ranking, and there's only two Dalton movies. That's also not a great ranking, so three movies together works a little bit better. Likewise, Griffin is a little bit more of a classic Bond fanboy. And so I wanted to bring in his perspective. The way this ranking works is basically I took my ranking, Griffin's ranking, and the Rotten Tomatoes score ranking, averaged the three of them together. That gives us our master list that we're going to have on here. And with that said, let's get started. Coming in third place is The Living Daylights. So as for me, the first Bond movie that I saw in the theater was GoldenEye. And so the previous two Bond films that were running on cable all the time were The Living Daylights and License to Kill. So those are, this one and License to Kill are two of the ones that I just watched most frequently growing up on television. And this one was always a little bit, felt more classic Bond in the nature of the story, but also felt a little bit, rewatching it, like it's torn between two worlds of the more serious Dalton aspect while still having a chase sequence where they're riding down a cliff on a cello or in a cello case. What's kind of your take on The Living Daylights?
Yeah, so I love this movie, and I just rewatched it recently, both this and License to Kill, and I think this one actually went up higher in my overall ranking than I previously had it. Just full disclosure, all three of these films are in my top 10 favorite Bond films. I think this is outside of like the Craig and some of the other, Connery and a couple of the Brosnan films. These are about as good as you get. It's interesting that you say you felt the meshing or sort of like the contrasting of the harder edge Dalton with the the traditional Bond camp and sort of globetrotting adventure, because I feel that more with License to Kill. I feel like License to Kill is a film where they should have committed 100% to the harder edged, and they do for the most part, but there are a couple elements that just sort of pull them out, and that for me is why I think I prefer The Living Daylights over License to Kill. But this to me is such a quintessential Cold War espionage film. I mean, you've got a great villain with Necros, and then even Koskov. Yeah, that's right, Koskov. I think you have a great henchman with Necros, who has his own theme song by the Pretenders, which is just, it's so good, so catchy. The thing that I love about this movie, it really is Timothy Dalton's portrayal of the character right out of the gate because he gets it. He immediately gets it, which I think isn't something you can always say for the actors. Usually it takes like a film for them to sort of like find out what their take on the character is. This is the movie where Richard Maybaum and John Glenn and a lot of those guys that were actually originally involved in On Her Majesty's Secret Service were finally able to go back to that serious character drama that they were trying to accomplish with that film. They go back to it with this one, and they're writing for an actor that is on the same page with them. And so I think all of that is clicking, and you really get to explore Bond's autonomy as an agent. Yes, he is sent on missions and he's doing things, but we're not necessarily like, him just being an agent of the British government isn't a very sympathetic character. Right. I think that seeing him make decisions, showcase his instincts, show us why he is the best of the best. And then also the respect he has for like other agents. You get that with, the Bond woman in this one. I think seeing how he sort of like feels for her, even though he's like lying to her throughout the entirety of the movie, is a really interesting way to play that. And I think this is the first time where not the first time, but one of the few times where I actually felt like Bond, I genuinely feel him falling for the woman in this film, which is not always the case. Right. But in this one, there is a genuine, connection there that I buy into that I really, really like. On top of that, the action, like that. Yeah. The plane sequence at the end where he's fighting Necros is excellent. I mean, the opening, I think this is an incredible opening for a Bond film, especially, the first outing for someone like Timothy Dalton, sort of like the training exercise gone wrong. Not to take up too much time, but I think this is, John Barry's best score that he's ever done. I really like the song by Aha. I know that's a controversial opinion. Some people have it ranked lower. I think it really slaps. Overall, this is just quintessential Cold War espionage. It feels like the spiritual sequel to something like From Russia with Love. But it's set in the 80s, so it's like so much of the Cold War has already passed, and it really sort of engages with those elements through the lens of Bond and where he sort of fits into this whole thing. He's less so a direct extension of the government and more of a guy doing a job and making judgment calls, which is something that we see happen in the Craig era, right. Pretty evidently. So this is the precursor to that.
Right. Well, I think that's a lot in the first 25 years of Bond. There wasn't a lot of change in the character. There was the archetype of the ultimate male, but there wasn't as much of the decision making as you kind of referenced in there. Mm. And that's in Dalton's, you see very much this is a guy with connections to people that cares about them. And as you said, the action, this is where you start, like, it starts to feel like modern day action, and certainly in the 80s version of that with, wide shots of stuntmen dangling out of the back of the plane and then close-ups of our actors. But all that stuff that I grew up watching, that it feels much more exciting when you're doing these massive size action sequences. I think some of it for me holds it back a little. So for me, this is, of the three, was in my number 3 spot.
Yeah.
That it, even in kind of the plot, in all the globetrotting and all the double crosses and everything, it's a little bit of like, wait, we're in Afghanistan now? Wait, when did we get here? There's a little bit of that kind of going on. And there's some of those sorts of plot lines also sit really weird in present times, especially when you're rewatching this movie in the context of the last month. And there, in the late 80s, there were several of these big blockbusters that tied to the conflicts going on in Afghanistan, Rambo 3 being the other one that comes to mind. Right. And they're kind of confusing to even process what all of that means in light of the last 35 years.
Well, I'm actually really happy you brought up Rambo 3, because that was something that I directly sort of when the stuff in Afghanistan sort of comes up in the film, which I love. I think that's one of my favorite parts of the entire film, I think it is really tastefully done because he never tries to overpower, right? He never tries to insert himself in there and become like this white savior. But I think when you compare it to something like Rambo 3, which is very, very, very dated in its approach of that conflict, I think the way The Living Daylights engages with that conflict is tastefully done, and I think that it's not sort of beholden to the time period that it came out in.
Where did you have this one amongst the three? Where did you have it ranked?
I have this ranked second.
So you have it ranked second. I had it third. Rotten Tomatoes, between all these movies, they're in less than 10% difference between all of them. So they're all very close. Rotten Tomatoes was very kind to all three of these films with its aggregate score. But Rotten Tomatoes gave this one a 75%, which is the lowest of the three. So between my three, its three, and your two, it did come in third place. As you said, though, these are all solid Bond films. They have something unique in what they offer.
Yeah, and I'll just sort of end on this. Out of the three films that we're discussing today, and actually out of most of them in the franchise, this I find to be the most underrated. This is the one that sort of flies under the radar, and I think even within the Bond community, it is still not appreciated to the level that I view it as.
Our runner-up, License to Kill. As I mentioned before, these two Dalton films were the two that were on cable television all the time when I was growing up, and License to Kill was the one that was on the most. So this was the Bond film that I had the most exposure to when I was first seeing Bond films. And as someone that loves revenge films, action thrillers, this one was right up my alley. So I have always had a soft spot for License to Kill, both because it was the one that I watched all the time growing up, and then also because just as a genre, him being out for revenge, that's my kind of thing. But I think even beyond that, because Bond's motivation is personal and clear from the very beginning, I think it makes for a more focused film in a lot of ways. Especially watching through a lot of Bond films where there's a lot of globe-trotting and a bunch of different plot points kind of going on. You're piecing together exactly what the mission is and what they're trying to accomplish as it goes along. And I appreciate with this one, 15 minutes into this movie, exactly what it's about and what the big payoff's going to be at the end. You know exactly which jerks that you want to see die horrible deaths, and this movie delivers violent deaths to these people, including a wonderful sequence where Benicio del Toro gets shredded on camera as you watch, and where another guy is pressurized and then depressurized and explodes. And it is absolutely glorious. But so for me, this has always been kind of a personal favorite Bond film. Yeah. If you know my taste in movies, it's not surprising that I would have a good bit of bias towards a movie like this. But then also, as you mentioned in the last one, it's a more confident Dalton.
Yeah.
And it's a Bond that makes personal choices, goes against the agency, and so it's easier to invest in that mission that he's on. So for me, that's why this one, of the three, I'll cut to the chase. This is my number one of these three movies, which isn't terribly surprising for most people that are familiar with my taste in movies.
Yeah, I had a feeling for a second. I was like, oh, this is number two, but no, I 100% saw this coming in at number one for you, and I'm not surprised at all. Here's how I sort of look at it. There's two extremes to Bond, right? There's Die Another Day, or actually Die Another Days if you go over that end of the spectrum. The way I sort of look at it, you have Moonraker and then you have License to Kill. Mm-hmm. Both very opposite ends of the spectrum, doing pushing the Bond formula as far as you can go on either end. And I think License to Kill is so radically different that people were not ready for this when it came out. It did not get a very warm reception upon its initial release, and it has taken years for it to sort of come back around and for people to really appreciate what it was trying to do. But I love it as just like a straight up action revenge flick. Also, I just sort of like prefer the espionage sort of take on Bond more than the revenge mission. but you see how personally motivated he is. What we were just talking about with the Living Daylights, carrying on that like respect he has for agents, for operatives. He understands that they're just people doing a job. They're not, they're pawns in a game, and he doesn't disrespect them for that. But when someone disrespects his colleagues, right, he takes that personally, especially someone like Felix Leiter, who has really become like a close friend of his. And I enjoyed seeing and exploring some of that relationship
even
in there.
Starting it off with Felix getting married, like what's as human of a thing that you can do that ties friends together, that he, they're doing a mission, but they're also showing up at his wedding. Like, how do you communicate in one thing to do that these two people actually care about each other, that sets everything up?
Yeah.
He's right there at the wedding.
It is well, it sets up the whole film, right? Because you have the stuff going on with Sanchez, and then they have to like get out to like stop Sanchez. And I mean, right off, the thing that is so impressive about this film is it establishes everything within like the pre-title sequence. We understand who Sanchez is. We hate him. We see how he treats people around him, how he treats women, how he treats people who are disloyal to him. And the person I want to give credit to is director John Glenn. I mean, he started out in the editing room, piecing together these films. He understands this character and what you need to do in a film like this and how to subvert it in certain ways. You talked about the insane violence. I still think this is the most violent Bond film to date, just in terms of the gruesomeness of it, the graphic nature. I mean, like this is a movie that only could have come out in the 80s. It really has that sort of like flavor to it.
Gone are the lasers to cut people in half. Anything wacky, campy. No, just have a shark eating the legs off of a person as they're slowly learning to water. Pressurized so they explode, ground to death. The usual stuff.
Well, and then you get the tanker chase at the end, which is one of the all-time great climaxes in all of these films. It's like the stakes are high, the urgency is there, the actual practicality of the entire thing is still impressive. It still holds up. And when he kills Sanchez, I mean, that is
lights him up. That
is such a rewarding kill because the guy is deplorable. Like you hate him. He is easily like a top 5 Bond villain or something like that, just because of how horrible he is. And I think it was smart for them to focus less on like the nation battle, the Cold War, because the Cold War had really ended at this point. Instead, they focused more on the stuff that was happening in the United States, which I found to be really interesting because it was lending an outside perspective to this, the drug cartels. And then obviously, young Benicio del Toro, I think, is such a great little side character in this thing. He's creepy. He's like, you start to see those Benicio del Toro isms that we come to know from him form here.
It's a great example of how you take a character that on the page he's just a henchman with a switchblade. Yeah. And then you put Benicio del Toro in there, and suddenly he's got these crazy eyes and creepy little things that he does that just make him like, ugh, what a gross, this guy's gross. I can't wait to watch this guy die a horrible death.
And they deliver on it. I honestly think he might, other than the guy who got pressurized, which that guy sucked. I mean, like he just like one of the worst characters, in there. So that was okay. I was okay with that. But other than him, I think Benicio has the gnarliest death out of the whole thing. Even Sanchez doesn't get. I mean, he burns to death, which is bad. But just like from an audience perspective, it's like, okay, we've seen people burn before. We don't really get to see people like churned into meat, And
I think that's the detail about it also that makes so much of this movie just so brutal. Yeah. Is that it, guy sets on fire and dies, things like that. And people get shot and die. In this movie, we get a couple seconds of them screaming in agony. We get a couple seconds of, the mulched up human pulp of Benicio del Toro. It shoots it at the camera a little bit. You have the guy in the thing, they're like, please stop! You see him explode and it splashes blood on the camera. Like, everybody begs for their life, shrieks in pain, and then there's a spurt of blood where it's like all the different levels of like, whoo, okay, you're going for it. And I love it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That stuff is great. The other thing I really like is this is the first time we get to see Q in action.
Q. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
he's like very involved for the entire second half of the film.
Yeah, and this isn't the spring chicken Desmond Llewellyn.
No.
Like this is him towards the latter part of his life, and he's great. And then also we have Pam Bouvier in here. Played by Kari Lowell, who is a great sort of like equal to Bond as the fellow CIA agent. So we rope her in as part of the team. And then even Lupe, I really enjoy. I know some people think that Lupe is just sort of the throwaway damsel sort of character, but there was a strength to her that I really like. I think if I had one critique, and this is something a lot of Bond fans have sort of commented on over the years, it's that Pam and Lupe should have been one and the same sort of character, because I think both sides, they're half of one character, if you will. And I think there's something interesting. There would have been something interesting to the fact that maybe if Pam had been like a CIA informant, kind of like snitching on Sanchez and stuff like that would have made her character arc feel a little more fleshed out and make both characters feel like more complete people, as opposed to two halves of one whole, if you will.
All right. So amongst our three films, where was this one ranked for you?
This was 3.
For me, it was number 1. And for the Rotten Tomatoes, it came right in the middle. Though it's 77% versus The Living Daylights 75%. So it's like one more positive.
Right.
But as we've said before, all of these are a solid set of films. One of the reasons I brought Griffin to join us for this ranking series is that he's much more of an actual Bond fanboy than I am. In fact, over on his channel, he's already done some Bond video essays, and he's got more coming leading up to No Time to Die. Can you plug that real quick?
Yeah, for sure. So if you head on over to the channel right now, depending on when this comes out, we already have a video essays on there for Quantum of Solace, a very, very extensive defense of that film. And then we've also got one on Pierce Brosnan's second outing, which is Tomorrow Never Dies. And we're working on a couple right now. So I'm very, very excited to bring those two to you all. And then also, obviously, No Time to Die when that hits theaters. So you can head on over to the FilmSpeak channel and check out those videos as they drop.
But coming in at first place is On Her Majesty's Secret Service. So this is a movie that I don't think I had actually seen until I started watching through all the Bond films in preparation for No Time to Die. And then because of that, I've now seen it twice because the movie's been delayed, so I had to rewatch it multiple times in prep for this exact video. But simply because it wasn't associated with one of the other main actors, it just kind of fell through the cracks. And I'd heard about it, and as the years passed, it started to hear more and more positive things about it, and I just hadn't ended up watching it until this last year and a half. And it's an interesting experience because on almost every level, it feels different from any other Bond film. When it comes to the action and the editing of the action sequences, they're way more dynamic than what was going on with the Connery films or the Moore films. And very specific to that time period, but way more energy to them. Even the sound effects are heightened to bring extra energy to all of it. Obviously Bond throughout the course of the film has more transformation with his relationship with this woman and what he decides to do because of that. And just even kind of the scope, size, length of the action sequences in the back half of the film. There's all these things about it before we even start talking about the fact that it's this gentleman that only played Bond once, that inherently gives it a novelty to the entire experience. And so it was an interesting one to check out because having not seen it before, and then within the first few minutes, he's getting in these fights, and the way that they're cut together is like, whoa, this is way cooler than what we were doing back in Dr. No. So, Griffin, what's your take on Her Majesty's Secret Service?
It's one of the best in the franchise, for sure. I mean, even though I think people may prefer the Connery films to this one just on an enjoyment level, this movie was doing stuff that those Connery films weren't really tapping into to this extent. I mean, this was, you know, Richard Maybaum and Peter Hunt and the rest of the team when it came to the writing department and the producers and whatnot. They wanted to do something personal and different. And I think that's what they definitely did. They actually explored the character in a way that we hadn't seen prior. Not that those Connery films are bad, and they're not. They're excellent. I love all of them except for Diamonds Are Forever. That one's a piece of trash. But like this one, it was just, I don't know. It's so fresh. And I think it also, some people are like, oh, it would have been great if Connery had been in the role. And it's like, yeah, if Connery had been in the role, you'd have all the baggage of the previous films, which would probably make this film hit a little harder than it does. But man, there is something really compelling about Lazenby in this role. And I know he gets shafted because he only did one movie, and people are like, well, he wasn't even an actor. He was a model beforehand. And he just sort of like, actually, I'm going to plug this real quick. Go watch the documentary. It is on Hulu, I believe.
Becoming Bond? Was it?
I think it's Becoming Bond or something like that. And George Lazenby tells the story of how he became Bond and like him working on Honor Majesty's Secret Service. And he's just like such an entertaining storyteller in his own right. So he makes the whole thing really engaging. But it is literally like just a documentary of him telling his experience, what led to him getting to the role, the fallout that happened afterwards, where he like infamously declined to return, and how he's like regretted it ever since, so there's a really interesting documentary that sort of talks about the creation of this film and Lazenby in particular. But I was talking to a friend about this a couple days ago. George Lazenby is an incredibly giving performer that not only, can hold his own, as Bond, but like he allows like some of these incredible performers like Diana Rigg, or Telly Savalas to like play off of him in a way that is so natural. Diana Rigg is like a world-renowned actress. She was in Game of Thrones, and has just been, done a bunch of very high quality work. And Telly Savalas, I mean, my God, like he is just like one of the all-time great character actors. And in this film in particular, he brings Blofeld to life in a way that is less mustache twirling from, what Donald Pleasance is doing in, You Only Live Twice, which is like, look, I like Donald Pleasance in that. I think it's a very striking look. But every little bit of Telly Savalas' performance in this as Blofeld, I just fall in love with the way he holds his cigarette, right? It's something so simple as smoking a cigarette.
It's just reversed that hand gesture.
Yeah,
weird.
But it's like so pompous.
I noticed that, of things to notice watching this movie that you would bring up that I was thinking while I was watching it. Yeah. Even the way he held a cigarette catches your attention.
I know, he is just like so. Every single time he has a scene, he's like talking about something. There's like the man is just like, he just eats up the scenery. I'm getting chills talking about it because I love his performance so much. He is by far my favorite actor to have played Blofeld. And then, when Tracy comes in and sort of exploring that relationship, it's not love at first sight, but it is something that you believe their romance as it grows and it blossoms throughout the entirety of the film. But then, I mean, when it comes down to it, the way that Peter Hunt directed this film is stunning. I mean, this movie still holds up. This has some of the most gorgeous cinematography out of the entire franchise. I mean, we talk about that raid at the end on Piz Gloria. The helicopter shots, the use of natural light, the sun, the action, the way that entire thing is staged and choreographed, the skiing chases, the skiing chases are so edge of your seat and exhilarating because there's like real stakes involved, right? Like we actually believe that Bond might not make it out, and that there are these global catastrophes that could happen if he fails. And then also there's the personal element of like Tracy's involvement in there, and the way that, Diana Rigg plays her. She's so capable. She's like the first true, three-dimensional female character in this franchise. But no one is as fully formed and on the same level as Bond as someone like a Tracy, and that's why when she dies at the end of this movie, it is heartbreaking. And just before I toss it back to you, that scene where she does get killed.
There's no hurry, you see. We have all the time in the world.
My God, George Lazenby is acting his ass off. I mean, he gives an incredible.
He's just a model.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Like it's really impressive. Just sort of the craftsmanship behind this, the how different it feels, the cinematography, the characters, the villains. I mean, it's all just. There's a reason this is the most personal Bond film up until we got Casino Royale.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, especially as soon as it starts, it just looks different.
Yeah.
And I believe we were talking about Dr. No, how it seemed like a bunch of the sequences are shot in a way that felt like a filmed play.
Yeah.
Because it's one camera shooting at a scene in front of them and the camera pans and it does this, but you're just seeing that. It was lower budget. There's, of course, a lot of reasons for that. But you're looking at a movie that's less than 10 years later and the amount of just cinematic trickery on display, cinematic, and the fight scenes no longer being and then a guy falls over, but like actual choreography, intentional use of the camera, locations, close up to make all of it exciting. And I mean, you really kind of see the transition from old school action that was just not much of it, the John Wayne big punch, to actual choreography in films to make fights interesting to watch and have a dynamic energy to them.
Lazenby really prepped well for those hand-to-hand fight sequences, for the action, because he had to make up for the fact that he wasn't really an actor, right? Like, I mean, he has great scenes here and there, but like, how can he sell the fact that he is James Bond other than, acting to the camera and performing in that regard? And he did it through physicality. Yeah, and then on top of that, like, you're talking about just the visuals in general. It is one of the most visually distinct movies out of the entire franchise. It's a film that is beloved by many, modern day filmmakers. This is Christopher Nolan's favorite Bond film. I mean, he's clearly, pulling from this in movies like Inception, with the whole snow base and the skiing sequences and stuff like that. So it's a movie that is, even influenced some of the great filmmakers of our time. So if you haven't seen it, go see it.
Where is this movie on your list?
This is number one.
Rotten Tomatoes also has it at number one with 81%. I had it at number two. But as we've said all along, all of us saying these are solid Bond films. There's not like the obvious bad one that's just wacky or anything like that. Any final thoughts as we close out?
I'm just going to harp on the fact that, like, these are three movies that fall through the cracks for a lot of people. Timothy Dalton, George Lazenby didn't have a fair shake per se, but their films, rank among the best. So just go watch them. With
all that said, we will be back a week or two with our Pierce Brosnan ranking, and then No Time to Die actually is coming out in less than a month, which is incredible. I know I'll be doing my own individual ranking of all the Eon James Bond films, as well as the actors, all that fun stuff. Anything, where are you at? You're that way. Anything over on your channel you want to plug real quick?
Yeah, we're gearing up to No Time to Die. We're going to be releasing a couple of Bond video essays over there. So I've got one that we're about finished on Moonraker, which I actually, if we had redone the Roger Moore ranking, I think this would bump up on that list a couple of slots. So we're doing a deep dive on Moonraker, which I'm really proud of, and then one of my favorite movies of all time, Casino Royale. I'm finally sort of sitting down, and we're gonna hammer that thing out, and I think it's gonna be a great video. And then obviously No Time to Die is right around the corner, so we'll have something for that as well.
With that said, join us down below in the comment section. Share your ranking. Check out our other two rankings right over. I don't know where they're at the moment. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.